All right, hi. So my name is Abdullah. I'm a PhD candidate at St. Andrews University, and yeah, so this is a paper I've been working on, an article. Hopefully, it might be a bit longer. I'm not sure yet, as it's still in the process. It is about conceptualizing the Iraqi state, looking through the historic lens of the political elites, essentially. And as they were the ones that formed the Iraqi state, I feel they have a lot to speak to this, and to interact with them in terms of analysis. I would like to interact with them through their memoirs, because I feel there's still a lot of information that we haven't utilized in that capacity. So yeah, so I thought, so as this talk goes on, I'm basically going to start with where the thought process came from, where I see the foundations of this kind of research and methodology coming from, to explain the reason for this, because there is a large disjuncture currently in Iraq today between the people and the state, and this is what informs a lot of this research. So to start off with, this is an old Iraqi song that's still very much well known in Iraq, and it's important because it's important to me where I come from in understanding Iraq, and it's important I think for this paper. So basically, as you can read there, the song goes, there's the translation, but just quickly, that translation, basically the pomegranate tree is referring to the Ottoman Empire and their rule over what is Iraq today. The red pomegranate refers to the soldier's uniform. Lemon refers to the British that came to the rescue. Then the writer, who we don't know who the writer is, by the way, I forgot to mention that. This is old folklore. Refers to the sweetness, which is, lemons we have in the south. And he's referring to the British forces. We do not want this. Take me to my people. And my people here is a rough translation of the word ehli, which can also mean parents, ancestors, and so forth. The reason for this is the my people here is really important. We still don't understand what this means, because Iraq's position as a post-colonial state has really muddied the lines of understanding what it means to be ruled by our own people. And so this is the start. So historical period, Iraq, the Kingdom of Iraq was under a constitutional monarchy with the British mandate up until 1932. Now, this period is very important because after this period, we have the dictatorships that followed. So the communist dictatorship under Abdul Karim Qasim, then the Baathists, and then from there you come to 2003, and all of a sudden we have a liberal democracy. We can say that in name almost, because what we see now is the disjuncture and the corruption and everything that's going on there. And essentially, Iraq is towing that line of a failed state, essentially. So in this time, if we understand this time a little bit better, we can understand Iraq's first real attempt at democratic practice in an international order, basically, and following this kind of new wave of democratization. So in that time, there's a revolving door. You had these same kind of politicians coming in and out, and they were the ones in charge. And I think understanding them is very important, because we understand the foundation. So if we understand it from a point of path dependence theory, so looking at what happened historically to try and explain what's happening today, they offer invaluable insight. So today, this is the last bit of overview. So today what we have is this huge grassroots movement, and it's not dissimilar to what the movements that happened around the 20s through the 30s. And we even had a few in the 40s as well. They were asking for the same thing, for more basic human rights, freedoms, and basic services from the government. Today, Tishreen, which is immense, started in 2019, but there has been build-up before that, 2015 and 2018 as well, can be argued, has been huge and isn't too dissimilar. On top of this, it highlights this disjuncture. You have this government that operates that doesn't necessarily reflect, their structure doesn't necessarily reflect their actions. On paper, it is a democracy. Back then, on paper, it was a constitutional monarchy that had a parliament. It was technically a democracy. So if we look at these things purely structurally, we don't explain this disjuncture as well. So in this continuity, this is where my research questions essentially come. So I'll just end the overview with this quote from another scholar. It's a fantastic quote, I think, but he's analyzing the Algerian uprisings. Talks about anti-imperialism has continued to resonate in the region. And he's basically just talking about how this foreignness, there's a foreignness with this government. It doesn't really resonate with the people as much. There's a serious separation. And here he talks about it in terms of foreignness, but then I want to argue as well that the Iraqis, the political elites that were in charge, might be operating within the same field or within the same circle as these kind of foreign leaders. So historically, or not historically, but now as well, the way Iraq's been studied has taken a lot of different avenues. We've got structuralist approaches, really state-centric, looking at the way the state has operated. We've got Magdalian state and society, so looking at institutions and the way their discursive relationship with the state. So kind of looking at this more in terms of their reactions with each other. And then we've got post-structuralists, and post-structuralists has really lent heavily on understanding the people from their ethno-sectarian backgrounds and understanding that type of discourse. These are important. I still fundamentally believe that if we want to understand Iraq better, we need to understand the conceptualizations that the country has been built on. Understanding it purely structurally in terms of what the state is, what the military is, and the way they're meant to operate doesn't really help as much as understanding the way that the people operate within these institutions, how they are essentially understanding their roles. When we understand that, I think we come a lot closer. So the post-structuralist approach gives us this opportunity. We've got historical memory and transitional justice and ethno-sectarianism, and they are all important. But essentially what historical memory did was it looked at the way it was co-opted, the way discourse was co-opted by the state and how the state used it to kind of create this Arab unity or try to create some kind of cohesion within the Iraqi state. Transitional justice links to ethno-sectarianism. Basically, after 2003, we tried to understand, or these scholars tried to understand the way Iraq is navigating this transition and the way the people understand their discourse in terms of their positionality as different sects and different ethnicities. I argue we can take this a step further or a separate step away from this and look at understanding the way the political elites operated. So here we've got King Faisal II, who was the last king. We've got King Faisal II is the one on the top there, in case you can't notice. The Ahmed Mukhtar Baban is the only colored photo there, and then Tawfiq Suwaydi. Now, Mukhtar Baban was the last prime minister Iraq had. Tawfiq Suwaydi was he worked closely with the second prime minister, Abdel Mohsen Sadoun, and also held premierships throughout Iraq's history. These politicians, understanding the way they conceive their roles in the political pyramid, understanding the way they view the state, the way they view the relationship with the people, I believe gives us insight into the way the state was truly operating beyond understanding just actions. So these are essentially the questions that from this. Now, we don't have memoirs for everyone, but fortunately we do have memoirs for Tawfiq Suwaydi and Baban, who I will show now soon. They operated quite heavily in government for those 38 years. Now, the theory behind all this essentially is I'm arguing that we need to start understanding Iraqis in the way that they understand themselves. So moving away from purely it's a post-colonial state, it's been influenced by the invasion, it's been influenced by the British Mandate. This makes sense and it happens, but as Dr. Vivian Jabri says, we can analyze them and these asymmetries of power and understand Iraqis as complex, independent, in spite of the violence that has happened. So taking it a step further, find deeper into their interactions within society. So using Tubert and Lacan here, who I'll dive into deeper now, but understanding society as an interaction. So beyond just looking at structure, but understanding their interaction as what made up the Iraqi state. So I apologize for the heavy words slides here, but basically the way Lacan views the symbolic order essentially is when you are born, you have these desires. You have desire that you try to conceptualize, and you can only conceptualize these by adhering to a symbolic order. So whatever language or whatever way you want to express yourself, you are adhering to a symbolic order. So essentially what Lacan is arguing is we move away from our ability to express our truest desire. But in language, there is a middle ground between desire, or the way we understand the world, and the way we have to express it. This comes from interpretive writing. So writing that isn't used to simply give fact, writing that involves our personal perception. And in this middle ground, memoirs exist. So these political memoirs are basically, what I argue, is what Tawfiq Suwaydi and Baban and others like them, they are basically giving us insight into the way they conceptualized the state. So their true desire, different from the structure that they were operating within. This is a different reality. This is a separate reality from the structural reality that we have. It is, sorry, not separate, but maybe it interacts with it deeper. So with Edward Said, he argues that there's a form of analysis that's contrapuntal. So appreciating these multiple realities and appreciating there's a way we can interact with these realities and appreciate them simultaneously. This is the contrapuntal analysis that I like to link to the discourse analysis, which is analyzing the language used by the Tawfiq Suwaydi and Ahmed Mukhtar Baban. So here, just a rundown quickly of Tawfiq Suwaydi and his history with the government, prime minister several times, minister of foreign affairs, deputy prime minister, minister of education, government's legal advisor, and so forth. He also worked very closely with Iraq's second prime minister, Abdul Muhsin al-Sadoun. So he was, I wouldn't say a right-hand man, but he worked very closely with him in helping him form his premiership. Ahmed Mukhtar Baban similarly was involved, let's say, in the premiership at the end, but he was also very close to the monarch family. So he worked in legal advice with them, and throughout his entire memoir, he talks about how close he was with the royal family. So the royal family that overlooked the political atmosphere, let's say, or the political climate, he was heavily linked to them. The reason I use these politicians is because of this link, because of not just the link, but because of their involvement heavily throughout the monarch period. So even if we try to compare it to today, we've still got this same kind of almost revolving door happening. There has been changes, yes, but there's still a lot of relevance given to a lot of the same politicians coming in and out. So with that, there is this kind of institutional reality that is occurring that bases itself off the way these politicians behave. And it's looking purely at constitution and the way that operates, I don't believe is enough. So there's a lot of quotes here, and you're welcome to read through them. These are some of the findings for El-Suwaydi. So El-Suwaydi had heavy emphasis throughout his book, throughout his memoirs, on the ability to command, the ability to control, and the personality of the leader. The leader for him was extremely important, that they have this strong personality that couldn't be swayed by any push, as well as the people. So the people with this were considered a form of swaying them, and it showed weakness. He truly believed in the anarchic framework. According to his book, he truly believed that the political world was anarchic. You could operate in whatever way you were capable of. So if you were able to take this control, then that was rightfully yours. This all was linked to him trying to connect to cohesion. So he believed that the government could not operate unless it was cohesive, it worked together. It could only work together under the strong arm of leadership. These quotes are some of the quotes, by the way. There's a lot more in my findings. I didn't have enough space to put them in. I'm still working through them as well. but they are small linkages to this. If you read the book, you also get a continuity of this kind of behavior and appreciation of what it's like to be at the top of the political pyramid. For him, it was so intensely based on authoritarian traits and rule and strong personality, and all of it was based on competence. This competence he connected to the people's incompetence. So they were not capable of leading themselves. They are not capable of leading themselves, and this kind of mantra manifests itself quite heavily. The argument I would make with this, and then now I'll link to Baban's findings, is these are the words of someone that was the prime minister of a country that was essentially leaning into democracy. So it was essentially starting to believe in the people being able to lead themselves. But it is it's really hard to navigate these two things when these kind of beliefs, these heavy authoritarian beliefs, while operating in a system that is essentially supposed to be democratic. Most basically, and you can see in the third quote there, it must be recognized in this regard that the Iraqi people at the beginning of the establishment of the state were not in a position that they can express their opinions in a reasonable manner, because most of the people do not understand the treaty with Britain and its intricacies, or in any political or any important political matter to do with the future of the country. This kind of rhetoric existed in a time when Iraq maybe had people that weren't as educated as let's say some of the Western states, according to Suwaydi and Baban. But also at the same time, we had these revolutions and these heavy pushbacks from the states advocating for democratic forms of rule and very progressive approaches to government. So there is a heavy discrepancy here that shows that this disjuncture wasn't just based on structural issues. It was based on internal beliefs of those leading the country, the political elites. So with Baban, something very similar happens in that he also believes in this anarchy, and competence is such a huge part of the way he sees it, more so than al-Suwaydi. What's more interesting here, though, is that Baban, who started to operate in this political elite more intensely towards the end of the monarchy period, displays much more of a fear. So with al-Suwaydi, he showed that the political elite could use democracy more as a charade to kind of appease the people and keep them quiet. But Baban shows that it was more of a fear, that it was more of a battle with the people. He still thought that the democratic charade could kind of help appease them, but he displayed a lot more fear. With him, it was more separate entities. So it was more Magdalian in the state that there are separate institutions fighting and combating each other for the state. But again, he believed in this unified rule under one head. So apologies, I lost where I am. Yes, here we go. So, and in the second quote there, and my politics was successful. I developed a devotion towards the throne on the basis that the throne is above all political considerations and should be looked to as the head of everyone's family. And so they, the people, essentially gathered around him, the king. As for the political differences between men of politics, they should stay confined between them and does not immerse the throne in it. Instead, it plays the role of collecting the word and unifying the purpose of Iraq's benefit. This comes on the back of a lot of pushback from the people against the monarchy and wanting a more constitutional democracy and removing the monarchy. Baban pushes back intensely against this. And more so throughout his book as well, throughout his memoirs, he advocates, for a centralized leadership. The progress that you see from Tawfiq Suwaydi to Baban is very minimal. I don't even know if I could call this progress, but what's interesting is the fear of the people becomes a little bit more intensified. This could be a difference of personality trait. I'm not a psychologist. I can't comment on this, but I think it's also interesting in the way that we see that the people as a institution or as a faction within the states become this important part that needs to be addressed. They need to be interacted with. But the interactions from these elites all seem to be either appeasement or subjugation. And so the argument I try to make here in this paper is we see this buildup towards the kind of authoritarian rule that came from the elites that followed. So the military personnel like Abdel Karim Qasim, like Bakr, like Saddam Hussein that came afterwards were so maybe they saw things in a similar way. Maybe this gives us more of a way of understanding the roots within the political elites. I'm not saying this about the Iraqi people in general. I'm just saying this. This juncture also means that we can look at the state and the elite in Iraq's history, and maybe even today, I don't know, with this understanding that there's a separation, because from the bottom up, there's been this historical pushback, and today now, for these democratic values and progressive values. But the top of the political pyramid seems to be in this kind of cyclical culture where they struggle to remove themselves from this top-down authoritarian type agenda. Yes, these are references. Happy for any questions. I hope you found that mostly interesting. So yeah, if there are any questions, feel free to jump in.
For now, we don't have any questions in the WABA app, but probably here in the Zoom or in the bridge room, feel free to open your microphone or just give your comment. Thank you. And thank you so much for your presentation. Really interesting.
Thank you. Thank you. I should mention that they were in Arabic, so the translations were done by myself. Yeah, I forgot to mention that.
Hello?
Hello, yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. You went through the history of Iraq, and so did you stop your history, or did you pretty much bring it up through current times, or is there a time frame? Because I wanted to ask you about the notion of sovereignty, the idea of, where is the source of political power in Iraq? Is it in the elites, or how is it that they can develop a stable and legitimate sovereign kind of authority?
So with my research with this and with my PhD thesis now, I do start at the start of the modern Iraqi state, so just after the First World War. I'm afraid to comment on this without doing even more research into it, but my understanding of where this comes from has been through A, coercion, and B, by co-opting kind of tribal elites. This was in the history back in the 20s and 30s, but what's really interesting and what we're seeing now today in Tishreen is that capital that they had, these kind of tribal elites or the political elites as well, is quickly fading, and it might have actually already faded. And this is why the people now are returning to these old actions of protest that have existed, but there is no longer either the immense coercion from a violent state authority, nor is there the kind of capital to keep them quiet, because they were kind of appeased through in the 20s. They were happy they were getting a state. Then they were finally happy that the British Mandate ended, and there was these small kind of concessions coming from the top down that would kind of silence things. Then there would be a bit more authoritarian type rule. Then there'd be a bit more like a kind of balance between these two. And what I can comment on what I've seen in Iraq in my age. I'm from Iraq, by the way. I forgot to mention that my generation mostly have lost this kind of connection, or lost the ability to appreciate any of these concessions anymore, because we understand more so, maybe, or based on our teachings from our parents as well, is that these concessions are no longer real. They're forms of appeasement. They're never going to get the state. We're never going to get the state that we want, a legitimate functioning state. So that kind of legitimate capital of the sovereign states, I don't think exists from the bottom up. And I think it's more just coercive and recognition from the outside in as well. So historically, the British Mandate, now we've got in a more hegemonic US world, after their invasion, when they recognize bottom up, I don't really think that legitimacy exists. People don't really resonate with any of the leadership. And this is what I, again, argue in this kind of post-structuralist push, is we don't see this unless we interact with the people or the leaders based on the discourse that they provide us with. So based on the way that they perceive politics or the political world in general. I hope I answered that. I know I took a little detour there.
Complex situation in a country that's important in the region, mainly because of the natural resource that's still useful. It's just I mean, there's so much more work that you have to do. It's obvious that there's a lot of more work you have to do. The only thing I'm just like, there are like 5 things I could talk about with Iraq right now. I'm not going to go into all these different aspects, but the one thing that sticks in my mind, and probably people would like to know, as you continue your research also, the whole phenomenon of ISIS acquiring by force much of the northern, and I'm not asking you to answer a question, but you know, a political movement occupying an entire northern region of Iraq by force, and having that whole debacle go on. You know, again, that's a symptom of something deeply troubling about the country. And I just think that you have an incredible project ahead of you, and it's a worthy effort. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. That means a lot. I'm also just starting out my academic career, so thank you for that. Any other questions? I don't even know if we have that many people here.
Yes, we have some participants online, but apparently they don't feel like they want to talk.
That's completely fair. Well,
Yeah.
look, thank you for listening to everyone that's here, and thank you for your comments and questions as well. I really enjoyed that.
Awesome. Thanks to you, and to all of you. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good presentation. Thanks.
Thank you.